Around 7 p.m. on July 28, 2009, police in Barcelona, Spain received an emergency call. The caller was an elderly woman who explained that her children had been unreachable for several days with no explanation. Worried sick, she had personally gone to their home to check on them, only to discover that the front door was locked tight from the inside, and she couldn't get in. With no other options, she had to ask the police for help. The address she provided was a 3-story villa located in the Canamat residential area, a relatively quiet neighborhood in the city. Upon receiving the report, police quickly dispatched officers to the scene. The elderly woman's name was Clara. The 3-story villa was registered under the name of her late ex-husband. Years ago, the entire family had lived together under this roof during happier times. However, as time passed, the marriage fell apart, and over a decade ago, the couple officially divorced. After the separation, her ex-husband moved out of the villa to live elsewhere. Clara, along with her second son Mario, who was still single at the time, relocated to the Premia area to start fresh. Her third son, Hugo, had long been at odds with his eldest brother Hector, and the two frequently clashed. In 2003, Hugo decided to move out and rent his own place to avoid unnecessary conflicts. Because of all these family changes, for the past several years, the spacious villa had been occupied only by Hector and his wife Susanna. However, about 2 months before the incident, Hugo's life took a difficult turn when he unexpectedly lost his job. To make matters worse, his girlfriend Liang Xianji was pregnant. With unstable income and rising living expenses, the couple had to reconsider all their spending. After careful deliberation, Hugo decided to move his girlfriend back to the family villa to save on rent, at least until their financial situation stabilized. The villa consisted of 2 main floors plus a basement below. After Hugo moved back, the couple Hector and Susanna occupied the second floor as their private living space, while Hugo and Xianji stayed on the first floor. However, they still had to share common areas such as the kitchen, dining room, backyard garden, and basement, making daily friction almost inevitable. The problem was that the two couples had completely opposite lifestyles. Hector and his wife were naturally quiet and reserved, living a reclusive life and rarely interacting with outsiders. In contrast, Hugo and Xianji were the outgoing, sociable type who loved spending time with friends. Almost every week, they would organize get-togethers with their close friends, sometimes for dinner, sometimes for online gaming sessions. In fact, on July 25th, the couple had already made plans with their group of close friends for their usual dinner and gaming night. This was a regular activity they participated in every week, so everyone was looking forward to the gathering. But when the appointed time came, Hugo and his girlfriend never showed up. The group tried calling multiple times, but the phone just kept ringing with no answer. Among the friends, Nicholas was the most worried. He kept trying to reach them, but had no luck. At first, he tried to reassure himself, thinking perhaps Xianji had gone into early labor and the couple had rushed to the hospital without time to notify anyone. By the next morning, still having received no news, Nicholas decided to personally visit the villa to check on the situation. When he rang the doorbell, the person who answered was Hector, Hugo's eldest brother. Hector casually mentioned that his brother and sister-in-law had gone on a trip to the countryside, his tone suggesting it was nothing worth worrying about. Hearing this answer, Nicholas felt extremely puzzled, and doubts began forming in his mind. Based on what he knew about Hugo's personality, if there had been a sudden change of plans, his friend would definitely have called ahead rather than leave everyone waiting for nothing. Moreover, he clearly remembered Hugo mentioning that Xianji had July 25th off, but had to work normally on July 26th. So how could they suddenly take off for a countryside trip at this exact time? Still uneasy with Hector's answer, Nicholas decided to contact Xianji's younger sister to see if she knew anything. However, the sister was also completely unaware of the couple's whereabouts and was surprised to hear that her sister had gone missing. Before long, news of Hugo and his girlfriend's mysterious disappearance spread throughout their circle of friends and family, with everyone discussing the matter anxiously without understanding what was happening. Upon hearing this news, Clara became extremely worried and immediately called her eldest son Hector to get to the bottom of things. But Hector insisted that his brother and girlfriend had gone traveling, speaking with such confidence as if there was nothing to worry about. Though still harboring many doubts, Clara temporarily accepted her son's explanation, telling herself she was probably just being overly anxious. Things continued this way until after 4 p.m. on July 28th. At this point, Clara wanted to call Hector once more, but discovered something troubling. Even Hector's phone was now unreachable. No matter how many times she called, she only heard an endless dial tone. By now, she truly couldn't contain her worry any longer and decided to personally visit the villa to see the situation for herself. But when she arrived, she discovered yet another strange thing. The key she had always kept couldn't open the villa's door. She tried repeatedly, but the lock wouldn't budge. At this point, she knew something was definitely wrong, and with no other choice, she had to ask the police for help. After receiving Clara's authorization, police began looking for a way into the villa. Fortunately, they discovered that the large glass door on the first floor hadn't been fully locked, allowing them to enter through the living room. When examining the front door, police realized why Clara's key couldn't open it. The door had been locked from inside, with the key still inserted in the interior lock. A preliminary look showed the inside of the villa appeared somewhat messy, with belongings not neatly arranged. However, all windows were intact with no signs of forced entry. The surrounding walls showed no scratches or climbing marks either. From these observations, police could basically rule out the possibility of an outside intruder. Everything looked as if the two couples had simply left the house on their own due to some urgent matter. However, one suspicious detail caught the investigators' attention. On the nightstand in the first-floor bedroom, they found Jianji's purse still sitting there. Inside, they discovered identification documents and passports belonging to both her and Hugo. This was highly unusual, because if the two had really gone out on business or traveling as Hector claimed, they absolutely couldn't have left such important documents at home. This discovery made police begin to suspect that something bad might have happened to the young couple. But at that point, police faced a legal obstacle. Without an official search warrant and unable to confirm this as a criminal case, their authority was significantly limited. They were only permitted to examine items in plain sight within the villa, while private items such as drawers, diaries, and personal storage containers couldn't be touched without authorization. Because of these constraints, the initial search didn't yield many valuable clues. Police did go down to the basement to look around, but found only piles of miscellaneous items, with a large freezer in one corner. At that time, they didn't open the freezer to check. Following police advice, Clara decided to stay at the villa overnight to wait, hoping her children might suddenly return. Throughout the long night, she remained anxious, her eyes fixed on the door with a faint hope that Hugo and Jianji would walk in at any moment. But the night passed in silence, and no one appeared. The next day, Hugo's close friends began arriving at the villa one by one to check on the situation and express their concern. Everyone gathered together, planning to discuss what to do next while trying to analyze all possible scenarios, where the couple might have gone, why they had suddenly lost contact, and whether any clues had been overlooked. When lunchtime arrived, Clara wanted to offer refreshments to her son's friends who had kindly come to help, so she went down to the basement to get some cold drinks from the freezer. She had no idea she was about to face the most horrifying sight of her life. When the freezer door opened, Clara froze at what appeared before her eyes. Inside the freezer were large black plastic bags stuffed full, and one of them revealed a pale white object that looked exactly like a human body part. She was so terrified that she let out a blood-curdling scream, her legs giving way as she collapsed on the spot. Hearing the panicked screams from the basement, the friends rushed down to see what had happened. When they saw the contents of the freezer, everyone was shocked. They immediately grabbed their phones and called the police. When police arrived and examined the freezer, they discovered a total of 4 large packages containing dismembered body parts. The packages contained the head and neck, upper torso and buttocks, both hands and feet, and both arms. Everything had been deliberately arranged to fit into the limited space of the freezer. After family members were brought in to identify the remains, they confirmed this was Hugo, the son who had been missing for several days. But the horrifying discoveries didn't stop there. At the bottom of the freezer, police found another smaller bag. Inside was a complete female body that hadn't been dismembered. Seeing the noticeably swollen belly, police suspected this was Xianji, Hugo's pregnant girlfriend. The killer had processed the body parts very systematically. Each part was carefully wrapped in bubble wrap, then tightly wound with multiple layers of tape before finally being placed in black plastic bags and sealed shut. This meticulous packaging method showed that the killer had prepared in advance and acted according to plan. After conducting DNA tests for comparison, results officially confirmed that the two bodies in the freezer were indeed the missing couple, Hugo and Xianji. The subsequent forensic examination report revealed heartbreaking details about how the two victims died. According to the findings, Hugo had been stabbed a total of 8 times, with wounds distributed mainly across his neck, chest, and both sides of his waist. Among these, one particularly fatal stab had severed his right pulmonary artery, causing massive blood loss and shock. This was determined to be the primary cause of death. Notably, when forensic experts closely analyzed the cut patterns of the stab wounds on the victim's body, they concluded that these injuries were inflicted by 2 people working together, not just one person. As for why Hugo's body had been dismembered, police theorized it was because he had a tall, large build, and if left whole, he simply wouldn't fit into the limited space of the freezer. As for Xianji, the cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxiation. Her head showed signs of being struck hard with a blunt object. The area around her mouth and nose displayed obvious bruising, and her neck had deep marks indicating strangulation. Additionally, her arms bore several defensive wounds, proving she had desperately tried to fight back. From these traces, forensic experts concluded that at the time of the murder, one person had covered her mouth and nose to prevent her from screaming, while another sat on her chest to carry out the killing. Another notable finding was that alcohol was detected in Xianji's blood. According to friends and family, ever since learning she was pregnant, Xianji had never touched alcohol because she was concerned about her baby's health. From this detail, police had grounds to conclude that before being killed, she had been forced to drink alcohol to reduce her ability to resist. So how exactly were these 2 people murdered? And where had Hector and his wife disappeared to? And why had they vanished at this exact time? To find answers to these questions, police immediately conducted a comprehensive search of the villa, leaving no corner unexplored. The results sent chills down the investigators' spines. At the scene, they found numerous pieces of evidence related to the case: plastic bubble wrap, black plastic bags of various sizes, used rubber gloves, an electric saw, an axe, binding rope, a stun gun, along with various knives and many other suspicious items. Particularly noteworthy was the abnormally large number of knives in the villa. They were found in almost every room, totaling over 200 blades. In the kitchen alone, there were more than 50, including every type from fruit knives and daggers to meat cleavers and bone choppers. When forensic testing was conducted on the collected knives, police discovered 3 still had blood residue on their blades, and test results confirmed it was Hugo's blood. During the search, police also discovered extremely important evidence in Hector's study: several handwritten notebooks. When they opened them to examine the contents, investigators were stunned by what they found. The pages didn't just contain a detailed list of tools needed to commit the crime. What was remarkable was that this list perfectly matched the items police had just collected from the scene, not a single item missing. But what made people shudder even more was that these notebooks also contained incredibly detailed records of the entire murder plan from start to finish. Everything had been carefully calculated, from preparatory work before striking, choosing the right moment to act, methods for disposing of bodies after the crime, to ways of erasing all suspicious traces, and even sample answers for dealing with police interrogation in case of arrest. Beyond that, the notebooks contained meticulous records of Hugo and Xianji's daily habits, such as when they usually woke up, when they came home from work, and which days of the week they met with friends. There were also hand-drawn floor plans of the villa and surrounding streets. The entire plan was presented with clear logic, each step tight and calculated, showing that the killers had spent considerable time preparing for this crime. Even more disturbingly, according to some sources, those notebooks also contained entries about the daily routines of both sets of parents. This detail sent chills down investigators' spines as they realized the killer's intended targets might not have been limited to just Hugo and his girlfriend, but could have included other family members as well. From these notebooks, it wasn't hard to see that every step the killers took had been meticulously planned well in advance. However, one thing left investigators extremely puzzled. If the killers had prepared so thoroughly for the pre-crime phase, why did the post-crime cleanup appear increasingly rushed and sloppy, leaving so many easily detectable flaws? This contradiction left many wondering about what had actually happened during the crime. Additionally, the case had another noteworthy point that caught police attention. During the search of Hector's room, they discovered a DVD box set of the TV series Dexter on his bookshelf, a famous American television show about a forensic expert who works for the police by day but is a serial killer by night. This show contains extensive professional knowledge related to forensic science, including techniques for dismembering bodies and methods for cleaning up blood at crime scenes. What's striking is that the blood cleanup methods and dismemberment techniques in this case were identical to those depicted in the show, as if the killers had studied and directly applied what they saw on screen. In fact, the killers had done a fairly good job of concealing blood evidence. The amount of blood remaining at the first-floor crime scene was so minimal that when police conducted their initial examination on July 29th, they didn't detect any suspicious traces whatsoever. It wasn't until 3 days later, when the investigation team decided to use luminol, a specialized chemical capable of detecting blood that has been cleaned and is invisible to the naked eye, that they found blood reactions in multiple areas of the house, including the staircase, living room sofa, and second-floor bathroom. From the collected traces, police developed a theory about how the killers had concealed the crime scene. Most likely, before striking, the killers had carefully laid out bubble wrap and large plastic sheets covering the floor and walls around the crime area. The purpose was to have these materials absorb all the blood splatter during the commission of the crime. After completing everything, the killers had gathered up and disposed of all these blood-soaked materials elsewhere, leaving no traces at the scene. Through careful study of the cut marks on the victim's body, police determined that the tools used for dismemberment were the electric saw and axe, 2 items that had been found in the villa. Notably, none of the crime tools collected at the scene bore any fingerprints, showing that the killers had been very careful to wear gloves throughout the entire process of acting and cleaning up afterward. One could say the killers had done a fairly thorough job of concealing their crime. However, even the most careful person slips up eventually. Despite all their meticulous calculations, the killers still left crucial traces on the basement freezer. During forensic examination, police found Hector's fingerprints clearly present on both the plastic bags containing the bodies and the handle of the freezer. This was irrefutable direct evidence. Additionally, the content of the notebooks was sent for handwriting analysis, and results confirmed that the handwriting belonged to both Hector and his wife, proving they had both participated in planning this crime. When combining all the collected evidence with the forensic conclusions about the cause of death for Hugo and his girlfriend, the full picture of the case gradually became clear. As previously analyzed, forensic experts determined that both Hugo and Xianji had been attacked simultaneously by multiple people, leading to their deaths. Hugo was stabbed by 2 people taking turns, while Xianji had her mouth covered by one person while the other sat on her chest to suffocate her. From the physical evidence, fingerprints on the freezer, notebook contents detailing the plan, and forensic conclusions about the murder method, police finally reached a definitive conclusion. Hector and his wife were the killers who had murdered his own flesh-and-blood younger brother and his pregnant sister-in-law. After committing this heinous crime, the 2 had fled the scene in panic, fearing prosecution. However, one big question still troubled investigators. What exactly had caused Hector and his wife, who had planned every tiny detail so meticulously, to keep making mistakes and leaving so many flaws during the post-crime cleanup? And especially puzzling, when fleeing, why hadn't they taken or at least destroyed those notebooks, which were clearly undeniable evidence against them? To answer this, we must mention another important figure in the family, Mario, the second brother. In fact, before the handwriting analysis results from the notebooks came in, police had briefly suspected Mario and considered him a person of interest. The reason was that on July 25th, the very day Hugo and his girlfriend lost contact, Mario happened to be at the villa. According to Mario's account during police questioning, that day he had plans to meet friends for drinks at a nightclub not far from the villa. Since it was close to home, he planned to return to the villa to sleep after the night out. However, when he left home, he forgot to bring his key. Thinking he would return quite late and not wanting to disturb his brother's sleep, around 11 p.m., he decided to stop by the villa first to grab his key before continuing on to meet his friends. But when he arrived at the villa entrance, he witnessed a rather strange scene. His sister-in-law, Susanna, was pacing back and forth alone in the yard with an anxious expression. What was even stranger was that the moment Susanna spotted Mario, she immediately appeared panicked, rushing straight into the house and locking the door behind her. Mario stood outside continuously ringing the doorbell, but no one inside opened the door or responded. He just stood there waiting like that, and it wasn't until more than 10 minutes later that his eldest brother Hector finally came to let him in. When Hector opened the door, Mario mentioned that he was planning to stay at the villa that night, and also asked why it had taken so long to answer. Hector explained that he hadn't expected Mario to show up suddenly at this hour, and besides, the house was messy and not suitable for Mario to see, so it had taken time to tidy up before opening the door. Hearing this explanation, Mario didn't think much of it at the time, just nodded and headed straight to his room to grab his key. However, when he entered the room, he noticed something odd. The bedsheet and comforter on his bed had both disappeared, leaving only the bare mattress. Finding this strange, Mario went back to ask his eldest brother about it. Hector paused and thought for a moment as if searching for an explanation, then slowly replied that those bedding items had gotten too dirty, so he had thrown them away and planned to buy new replacements. Hector added that since the room had no bedding, Mario should go sleep in the first-floor guest room for the night. Mario didn't ask any more questions after that, just grabbed his key and left to meet his friends. Around 3 a.m., after finishing the night out with friends, Mario returned to the villa. Not feeling sleepy yet, he sat in the living room watching TV for a while to sober up. During that time, he heard strange sounds coming from the basement, like someone banging on something. However, having drunk quite a bit that evening, his head was spinning and his body exhausted, so he didn't pay attention to those odd sounds, just figured he was hearing things or someone was doing something in the basement. After resting for a bit, he went upstairs to sleep. Around 6 a.m., in a half-asleep state, Mario heard more sounds, this time like someone moving heavy objects, dragging them across the floor. But being too drowsy and still affected by the alcohol, he drifted back to sleep without paying any attention. It wasn't until 1 p.m. the next day that Mario finally woke up. When he walked around the villa, he found the house completely empty with no one around. He assumed his eldest brother Hector and his wife, along with his younger brother Hugo and girlfriend, had all gone traveling somewhere together, so he didn't find it strange. He packed up his personal belongings and left the villa, returning to his own home. Based on Mario's detailed testimony, police were able to deduce and reconstruct what had happened on that fateful night. They believed that Mario's unexpected and unplanned appearance had completely disrupted the post-crime cleanup that Hector and his wife had been carrying out according to plan. At the moment Mario arrived at the villa at 11 p.m., Hector was most likely in the middle of cleaning up the crime scene, while Susanna had been assigned to keep watch outside. When Susanna suddenly spotted Mario appearing in the yard, she immediately panicked, fearing their crime was about to be exposed. In her panic, she rushed inside and locked the door to buy time, while alerting her husband to the situation. The couple was forced to quickly tidy up the living room and hurriedly move the bodies down to the basement to hide them before opening the door. Throughout the entire process of committing the crime and cleaning up the scene beforehand, Hector had been careful to wear gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. However, when he had to go open the door for Mario, he removed his gloves to avoid arousing his brother's suspicion. Afterward, being preoccupied with dealing with Mario's questions and trying to explain the unusual things in the house, Hector lost focus. When Mario left and he returned to the basement to continue processing the bodies, in his haste he forgot to put his gloves back on. This oversight caused him to inadvertently leave crucial fingerprints on the plastic bags containing the bodies and the freezer handle, becoming the key evidence that helped police identify the killers. Combined with testimony from Hugo's group of friends, police were able to piece together a relatively complete picture of the case. According to their accounts, on the afternoon of July 24th, one day before Hugo and his girlfriend lost contact, the friend group had gathered at the villa to hang out as usual. At that time, Xianji still hadn't gotten off work, so she wasn't home yet. Around 4 p.m., everyone said their goodbyes and left, and at that point only 3 people remained in the villa: Hugo along with Hector and his wife. From this crucial detail, police deduced that right after the friends left and before Xianji came home from work, Hector and his wife had seized this opportunity to attack Hugo together. According to the scenario police reconstructed, first they used a stun gun on Hugo, rendering him unconscious on the spot, then quickly tied him up to prevent resistance if he woke up. Once Hugo had completely lost the ability to defend himself, the couple used knives to stab and slash the victim to death. When Xianji came home from work that evening, she too was immediately attacked, with no time to react or call for help. After killing both victims, Hector and his wife began carrying out the steps to process the bodies and clean up the scene according to the plan they had outlined in their notebooks beforehand. However, Mario's sudden and unexpected appearance at 11 p.m. completely disrupted their plan. Without enough time to dispose of the bodies as intended, they were forced to hastily stuff the remains into the basement freezer to hide them. In the following days, as more and more friends and relatives came to the villa asking about Hugo and his girlfriend's whereabouts, Hector and his wife felt increasing pressure weighing on them. They realized their crime would sooner or later be exposed. Finally, on July 28th, unable to bear it any longer, the two decided to flee the villa in panic by car. In their frantic escape, they didn't have time to process or destroy much of the crucial evidence, having to leave everything behind in the villa, including the notebooks detailing their murder plan. After gathering sufficient evidence to identify the killers, police in the Catalonia region immediately issued an international arrest warrant for Hector and Susanna. However, tracking them down proved quite difficult. Both of their mobile phones had been turned off completely since July 28th and emitted no signal whatsoever, making it impossible for police to locate them through this method. To gather more clues, police contacted Susanna's workplace to inquire about her situation. Through this, they learned that before the crime occurred, Susanna had proactively requested long-term leave from the company, as if she had anticipated having to leave for an extended period. Not giving up, police continued to search through the credit card transaction records of the two suspects, hoping to find traces of their movements. Sure enough, through recorded transactions, police discovered that Hector and his wife were fleeing toward France. As soon as they obtained this information, Catalonia police immediately shared all data and identification photos of the two suspects with French border forces, requesting their assistance in intercepting them. However, day after day passed with no news about the whereabouts of the killer couple. It wasn't until September 16th, nearly 2 months after the crime was discovered, that French police suddenly sent word to Spain with information that brought relief to everyone. They had successfully arrested Hector and Susanna in a coastal city in northeastern France, ending the fugitive couple's escape. According to the report from French police, the arrest happened somewhat by chance. At the time, a patrol unit was conducting routine checks at a parking lot in the city. During their patrol, they noticed 2 people behaving abnormally. Their eyes kept shifting away, refusing to make direct eye contact with officers, their gestures and behavior appearing suspicious, as if hiding something. Seeing this, the patrol officers approached and asked the 2 to present their documents and cooperate with the investigation. However, instead of cooperating, both tried every excuse to refuse, and this uncooperative attitude only increased police suspicion. For safety reasons and to clarify their suspicions, the patrol officers decided to search the couple's vehicle. The search results startled them. Inside the car were several short knives, a roll of plastic tape, and identification documents for both individuals. When cross-referencing the document information with the International Wanted database, French police discovered these were Hector and Susanna, two suspects in a serious murder case being intensively pursued by Spanish police. They immediately handcuffed the pair and took them to the station, while simultaneously notifying Catalonia police of the successful arrest. At the end of September that year, after completing the necessary legal procedures, Hector and his wife were officially extradited from France to Barcelona to face justice. However, when brought into the interrogation room, their attitude infuriated investigators. Throughout the entire questioning process, both Hector and Susanna maintained absolute silence, not uttering a single word. No matter what police asked or what evidence they presented, the two just sat there with cold, emotionless faces, as if Hugo and Cianji, the victims they had brutally murdered, were complete strangers they had never known, rather than his own flesh-and-blood brother and sister-in-law. Because the killers adamantly refused to disclose any details about the crime, police could only rely on information gathered from Hugo's friends, relatives, and neighbors to analyze and deduce the motive. After compiling all testimonies and clues, police concluded that Hector and his wife's motive for the attack stemmed primarily from two main reasons. First, a scheme to claim the villa entirely for themselves, and second, long-accumulated jealousy toward Hugo and his girlfriend's happy life, which had gradually transformed into deep resentment. Hugo's close friend Nicholas revealed many important details about the tense relationship between the two brothers before the crime occurred. According to him, ever since Hugo and his girlfriend had moved back to the villa 2 months prior, conflicts between the two couples had erupted constantly and escalated seriously. The brothers clashed almost daily over all sorts of big and small matters in their shared living situation. About a month before the crime, Hector had repeatedly approached Hugo to discuss the housing issue. He proposed that since the two families living under one roof had accumulated so many conflicts, they should just sell the villa registered under their parents' name, split the money, and each find their own separate place to live in peace. However, Hugo firmly disagreed with this proposal. He argued that minor friction in daily life was unavoidable when multiple people lived together. It was normal and nowhere near serious enough to warrant selling family property. Furthermore, Hugo emphasized that this villa was shared property belonging to the entire extended family, not anyone's personal asset. Their second brother Mario and their mother Clara also frequently came to stay here. If they sold it, they would have nowhere to return to. The two brothers held completely opposing views, arguing back and forth multiple times without finding common ground or reaching any agreement. In the end, the issue just hung there unresolved. The deadlock in negotiations over the villa was actually closely related to the completely different attitudes and lifestyles of the two brothers. As mentioned earlier, Hector and his wife lived a life almost completely isolated from the outside world, retreating into their own shell. Outside of work hours, Susanna basically didn't communicate or interact with anyone. No friends, no acquaintances. Hector's situation was even worse. He stayed home unemployed year-round, had no job, and maintained absolutely no social relationships outside. During the investigation, police conducted psychological evaluations on both of them, and results showed they both suffered from personality disorder, a condition that left them completely incapable of empathizing with or understanding others' emotions. In complete contrast to Hector and his wife, Hugo and Qianji were well liked by friends and neighbors. They had a reputation as a friendly, open, and approachable couple. From time to time, they would organize cheerful gatherings with friends right in the villa, with laughter filling the house. However, these lively get-togethers made Hector and his wife, people accustomed to solitude and quiet, feel extremely uncomfortable and annoyed. The presence of Hugo and his girlfriend in the villa had completely shattered the isolated lifestyle they had comfortably maintained for so many years. Now they had to deal with noise, with strangers coming and going in the house, with conversations they didn't want to participate in. Compared to their previous reclusive lifestyle, Hector and his wife found it increasingly unbearable to handle the conflicts and friction arising from daily life when forced to share living space with others. And the final straw for Hector and his wife was likely Xianzi's pregnancy. Hector and Susanna had been married for 10 years, but still hadn't been able to have a child. Meanwhile, Hugo and his girlfriend, the people they already intensely disliked, were about to welcome a new life. Not only that, but this child would be born and grow up right in the villa, where they would have to see it every day. This was something neither of them could accept. Imagine how Hector and his wife felt having to witness Hugo and Xianji happily decorating the baby's room every day, painting walls, setting up cribs, hanging colorful toys. Then each day, friends and relatives would stop by, bringing gifts and well wishes for the little family about to gain a new member. This overflowing happiness from Hugo and his girlfriend completely ignited the flame of jealousy that had long been smoldering inside Hector and his wife. That flame grew fiercer by the day, ultimately driving them to harbor murderous thoughts and decide to take the desperate risk of committing this savage crime. By fall 2011, after more than 2 years of investigation and evidence collection, the case was officially declared closed. Prosecutors charged Hector and his wife with 2 counts of murder, corresponding to the deaths of Hugo and Xianji, plus 1 count of forced abortion. In May 2012, the Catalonia court issued its final verdict. Both Hector and Susanna were sentenced to 38 years in prison each. Moreover, the sentence stipulated that both must serve at least 25 years before being eligible to apply for early release, meaning that no matter how well they behaved, they would have to spend a minimum of a quarter century behind bars. As for why the 2 defendants were also charged with forced abortion, the court explained that at the time of her murder, Xianji was 8 months pregnant. The mother's death directly prevented the child from having any chance of being born. Therefore, the killer's actions also constituted the crime of forced abortion. In the verdict, the court clearly addressed an important point regarding the defendant's mental state. Although evaluation results showed that both Hector and Susanna had pathological personality traits, specifically personality disorder, that left them lacking the ability to empathize with others, this did not mean they were exempt from criminal responsibility. The court affirmed that both were normal individuals with full civil capacity under the law. They were completely aware of the nature of their actions when planning and carrying out the crime, and had the ability to distinguish right from wrong, good from evil. Therefore, the court concluded that no circumstances existed that could be considered grounds for reducing criminal responsibility due to mental abnormality or psychological disorder. At the time of the crime, Hugo was only 30 years old, while Xianji was just 26, still very young with a bright future ahead of them. The baby in her womb was already 8 months along, just about 2 short months away from being born. This little family of 3 had been filled with joy and hope for a happy future, but all of it was cruelly taken away, forever frozen in tragedy. And that's the case for today. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.